Hi, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Great. Anna, thank you for joining me on A Glimpse into the Moment. Everybody, I'd like to welcome Anna of Renee Campaign, a charity that is specifically targeted at survivors, pulling together survivors of bullying and sexual assault. And I'd like to welcome Anna, the founder and creator, and the host of Renee Campaign on Instagram. And Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you for you to introduce yourself and talk about your charity that you've created. It's a fabulous resource that I have found on Instagram.
Thank you so much, and thank you so
You're
much for
welcome.
having me.
You're
Um,
welcome.
I started the Renee campaign has kind of been, I want to say since so I'm close to 30. I think I've been wanting to start it since I was like 15.
Oh my gosh, that's
I
terrific. You've had this in the works then.
I definitely, yeah, it's been a long time coming, but I recently was like, okay, I'm ready to share my story. I think it's kind
Yeah.
of difficult to share everything you've been through. So I think
Yeah.
when I decided I was comfortable with sharing my story, because that's what helped me get through what I went through was
Yeah.
reading other people's stories and friends who had gone through it who were like, hey, this is what happened to me, like you got this. So I was like, maybe me sharing my story will help a little girl out there that is struggling, whether either reporting or thinks that something that's happening is normal and it's not normal. So that's kind of why I pushed really hard for it to launch this year. I
It's
so
powerful.
I oh, thank you. Yeah, I grew up in the Mid East. I grew up in Ohio, and we were a Middle Eastern family. We're Iranian Armenians, and we grew up in a very kind of farm community, so there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me. So,
Mhm.
and I also grew up there during 9/11. So
Okay.
I was definitely the target for bullying. They attacked probably every future of me,
Oh, I'm so
and
sorry.
it. I think I know it sounds horrible now, but like I think it shaped me in a way because it's made me so empathetic. It's made me such a patient person with other individuals because you really don't know what other people are going through.
Hmm.
And I initially it was only going to be bullying. And then in 2015, my primary care physician had sexually assaulted me. And that's when I was like, I really want to bring these two worlds together
My
because
goodness.
they, not that they go hand in hand. It's not to say that a person who bullies can sexually assault you, but I think the feeling of being sexually assaulted and then bullying yourself into either believing, oh, I deserved it, or hey, society has said that you did it the wrong way. So
Yeah.
I kind of want to bring them together. And that's initially what the Renee campaign, it's individuals sharing their stories, blogs of what happened. I am going to release the site. I wanted to do it next week, and you'll get the
Mhm.
full story of everything that happened. But I don't mind. I don't mind sharing. I When I was sexually assaulted in 2015, I think it
So
kind of
sorry.
it opened everything up, kind of. So
Yeah.
it's like because I was also sexually assaulted as a minor, and it kind of brought back all of those memories. So it was something that I knew what had happened to me as a child, but I was so young, and because the individual who had done it was a lot older than me,
Mhm.
I didn't have much of like I didn't get a say in anything. I wasn't allowed to see the individual. I believe I was 7 years old. He was in his 60s, so it was
Wow.
handled by the police department. It was handled by my parents, and I never really understood what happened. I knew it was inappropriate because I remember telling my dad on Christmas
Yeah.
Eve what had happened. So
Oh
I
my,
knew that it was wrong, but I don't think I comprehended what actually happened. And
yeah.
then when it happened again in 2015, I was like, oh, this is what is happening. It's bringing up old feelings. And it was like a downward spiral. I was like, what is happening? I'm bringing up things that happened to me as a child. And all of a sudden, it's like everything opened. This opened the door for everything, all the trauma,
Yeah,
all,
you were living all that trauma from childhood as well.
yeah, everything. It all came back. And I worked with a therapist. I was already working with a therapist. And this had happened while I was working with her, so it was just kind of um, it was an easy transition to talk about it because I was already working with one.
Yeah.
But what had happened was he had so I filed a grievance with Blue Anthem,
Hmm.
and they were like, "Oh, we don't see anything wrong with what happened." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird. Like, I'm pretty sure this is not legal." But I decided to take it to the next step and take it to the California Medical Board. And that's when the California Medical Board was like, "Yeah, this is not okay."
Wow.
But by the time the California Medical Board got my record, my doctor had disappeared.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, he was gone. He was off the grid, and he only left the PO box number, so there was no way to contact him. He had been texting me, so because he had my file, he had my phone number. He had been texting me, and he changed his number. I gave him the number. He had changed it. It was kind of a rough
That
patch
is
because
crazy. Oh my gosh.
yeah, you hit kind of a wall, and you're like, well, if they can't find him, how am I gonna find him?
Yeah.
And I called lawyers. I called a specific, and I didn't want anything out of this. I just wanted him to not be able to practice because the only thing going through my mind was he. I was in my 20s when it happened to me, but all I could think about was like a young girl going to him and maybe not comprehending what was happening, or him luring a young girl in who doesn't, and that was my biggest fear. Not that young individuals aren't capable of understanding that something's inappropriate, but my fear was that he was going to manipulate someone who was younger, and they were going to
Yeah.
they were going to go for wherever he was telling them to go, because he had
Right.
asked me to come to Palm Springs with him.
Wow.
So that's why I was worried. So I just wanted him to lose his license. I was like, this guy should not be practicing. He should not be seeing female
Yeah.
patients. He No lawyer would take my case. He had disappeared. They were like, have fun, like finding this guy. And 2 years later, the California Medical Board came back. They did a criminal investigation, and they were like, yeah, we're taking him to court. So
Wow.
I then called every lawyer. I was like, hey, I have the California Medical Board like on my side. They're having criminal charges against this man. What can we do? And they were like, oh, you passed statute of limitations. And I was like, what? So statute of
Oh my
limitations at the time, yeah,
gosh.
was 2 years. So I was like, this is now after I believe it was the Bill Cosby and the Harvey Weinstein cases.
Yeah.
California got rid of that, but it was moving forward. So
Yeah.
any cases in the past, I think before 2019, they were like it's done. But 2019 moving forward, you can still press charges. But yeah, I was kind of out of luck, and he got suspended for 3 years. He gets his license back this year, and he got hired at the next clinic I went to. So it's like he got all my files, everything back, and it's been a rough process. But the Renee campaign essentially was a kind of a resource. So it's so individuals, any survivor doesn't feel like I have no idea what to do, because nobody tells you what you're supposed to do. I had a
Oh,
sheriff working my case. Yeah,
it's terrifying. You feel so completely alone. You feel crazy. And then when the childhood, like your recession to childhood memories, if people, you had parents that were actively helping you through that, like in my case, childhood sexual trauma was hid and there was no therapy. So my memories were more ghost like. And through therapy, I've been able to work through that. But this kind of got together is massive for survivors of sexual trauma.
I, I'm so
You're
sorry that you went
incredibly
through that.
courageous.
Thank you. I'm so sorry you went through that. And it is horrible when it is hidden, because you grew up kind of I don't want to speak for you, but you kind of grow up blaming yourself. Like, oh, I must have done
Yeah.
something if it's
Oh,
it's
totally. Yeah, you
horrible
do.
to
You,
put that. I
yeah, it's ultimate self-abandonment, right? I mean,
definitely.
it's really, well, it led me very easily explains why I became a people pleaser and all these different things. It led me down a path. And I think that a lot of the people who would be looking at your resource and your website and your courage, because it takes incredible courage to report and continually push and follow through as you have done. And people who can see that then can begin to take those steps themselves, because if you can see somebody else tangibly walked in your shoes, it does reduce the fear that you have in doing it.
And it's also the concept of you're sadly you're not alone in the
Yeah.
process of it, because when it did happen to me, I definitely felt alone. And because it was my doctor, it was so confusing because the sheriff was like, "Oh, but you took your clothes off," and I was like,
I'm at the
"He's."
doctor.
I was like, "Yeah, he want it was a well woman exam. I didn't like I
What are
didn't
you
know. I
supposed to
was
do?
like he asked me. I was like, okay, like you're my doctor. I you don't comprehend that this man's about to take advantage. So I think
Yeah.
it was just a confusing process, and I remember how difficult it was, and I did it in a way that society has deemed, because we hear it all the time, right? When society was like, "Oh, that's not the right way to report it," and I did it, how society claims it's the right way to do it. I reported to this, I reported to that, I got a cop, I got lawyers, and it still wasn't the right way. So there is no right way to report it. And
Yeah.
society kind of pushes it on the woman, or I mean, not even a woman, a man, but just because more
Yeah.
women have spoken out about it, is that
Yeah.
we're erroneously told that, well, there's a right way to do it when there isn't a right way. And I remember being super confused. I was super hard on myself in that whole process. Um, and I also thought that I had to have a time limit of when I needed to heal. I was like, all right,
Yeah.
you got like 5 months, and then you gotta get up
Step out
and
of it.
go. Yeah. And I couldn't, like,
Yeah.
it's been what, 5, 6 years now, and I'm kind of still learning things, like certain things, like I hate the smell of doctors' offices, and I don't like people
Yeah.
standing behind me, or I don't like being touched. And that's the worst, because I'm a very affectionate person. Like I love love, and I you
Yeah.
can't touch me for long periods of time because I start getting really uncomfortable, and it does have long lasting effects. So
Yeah.
I just wanted other individuals to know, like, hey, this is, sadly, this is normal. You're not alone. And I thought if one individual has a specific story, they're gonna meet somebody else that has either a similar story that they can connect with and discuss and help each other out, because this platform that we have where we're survivors and we speak to each other, I know it helped me a lot. And that's who I initially reached out to when it first happened to me. I reached out to other survivors because I was like, what do I do? And they were like, this, we got you. This is what you do. This is how you're okay with how you feel. If you feel angry, if you feel sad, if you feel
Yeah.
forgiving, like whatever you feel is how you feel, and don't feel bad about it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no right or wrong. And as you go further and deeper into that healing process, it can get more intense, and or might not. Like everybody is so unique and so individual. It's just really important to surround yourself with people who are accepting of you no matter where you're at.
Exactly.
How has your family responded to the creation of your charity, of
They've been
your space? Yeah.
they've been super supportive. My For the whole bullying aspect, my mom, because my dad traveled a lot when we were growing up, so he wasn't really around a lot. But my mom always remembered that I was kind of like the awkward kid. Like I was very into like my books and video games. I didn't really have a lot of friends. I didn't make friends, and so she never really kind of tied it together with bullying. And I don't
Mhm.
know if that's also a cultural thing, because she didn't grow up here. She grew up in Iran, and for her, it's different. You go to
Mhm.
school usually with like your siblings, and she had 8 siblings, and her sisters they're all close in age. So I guess for her, she didn't really comprehend like you were bullied. And when I actually sat down and told her like, hey, this is what would happen to me at school, or this is what would happen to me on the bus, because in the Mideast we took the bus, and I
Mhm.
think she finally was like, why didn't you say anything? And it's because I normalized it. I was like, oh, this
Yeah.
is normal. Like it's not happening, or it's not happening to anyone else. But as long as I'm included in something, whether it's them being mean to me, I'm being included. And I think
Yeah.
that's the worst part, is as kids that's what we do. We want to be included so bad that when someone is treating us bad, we're kind of just like, oh, well, at least I'm being included.
Yeah. Yeah. because it's better to be included than to be excluded and be, ostracized in that way. Yeah.
Exactly.
I
So it
remember
was,
those days too.
it's rough. Like I
Mm,
feel for, especially now with, because I know for me, I mean, we had AOL growing up, but like it wasn't like social media how it is now.
yeah.
Nowadays, it's like everything is on Instagram, on Facebook, and now they have other stuff. And for me, it's
Yeah.
like we got bullied at home. If we would go home, or we got bullied at school. I'm sorry, not at home. If we got bullied at school, we would go home and it was kind of done, right?
Hmm.
AOL wasn't
You
this
could step
big,
out of it. Yeah.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
can't imagine having social media when I was in elementary school. It would have been horrible, or even middle school, because I see kids as young as like 13 having Instagram, and I'm
Hmm.
like, I could not
Yeah.
imagine
The
being in
constant
a,
bombardment that kids have now.
yeah, it's
Hmm.
it's horrible. And I started, so I named it so it's actually really sad. There's a quote I want to say it was Oprah that said it, where she said, or no, I don't remember who said it, and I feel awful for not remembering, but it said something like,
It's okay.
"You don't remember the things that someone said, you remember the things that someone did, or you remember the kindness of somebody." I don't know, I'm not saying the quote right, but it was something like, people don't remember what happened in a situation, they don't remember that, they remember the kindness of
Hmm.
one person and what they did.
Hmm.
And when I was getting bullied on the bus, um, it was just, the normal average thing. A girl stood up for me and she
Wow.
yelled at everybody, and her name was Renee.
Oh,
And I never got to say thank you. So the Renee campaign is kind of my thank you to her. But
that's
it's so
wonderful.
sad because I remember every bully's first and last name. Like, one
Mm-hmm.
of them reached out to me a few years ago and actually apologized to me on social media, but I cannot remember Renee's last name. And I've been looking for her for years to be like, hey, like, this is what you did. Like, you may, you're living your
Changed
life
my
and you don't,
life.
yeah, and you don't even
Yeah.
realize it. And I can't even remember. I've tried calling the school that I went to, and obviously it's privacy. So they're like, yeah, we're not giving you names or anything. But it's just crazy how you do remember the bad. So when people say like, "Oh, you
Yeah,
don't remember the bad that's happened," you do. You remember,
you
that
do.
quote, yeah, where they say sticks and stones may break my
Yeah,
words. Like, words hurt and they stick with you.
they do. Emotional attacks, things that emotionally hit you, that change you inside in who you are, they become a part of you. And, the fact that the girl's Renee, that her name has stuck with you, that's a major benefit to you. I mean, not benefit in all the things that you've done. I mean, that is a major testament, better word, testament to you to cling on to her first name. You know, quite honestly, that is something that could have been lost over the years with the other subsequent traumas that you've had, but it didn't. And so, you need to give yourself some credit because our trauma brain can delete a lot of good that we have around us in our life. And as we kind of, there's a time in our healing process where we actually have to hold on to the bad so that we can grip it as real and walk through it and then put it aside. Because if we don't do that hard work, we're never going to be able to put it aside and do, something as courageous as you've done in creating this resource. So it's a major testament to the fact that you have done a lot of work in therapy and a lot of focused healing.
Thank you. Yeah, I
You're
definitely
welcome.
hope one day she falls upon this page, um,
Yeah.
and goes, "Hey, I remember that story," because the about me will obviously be the story about why the Renee campaign came about. So I hope she reads it and she's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I did that." So
Yeah. That would,
kind of,
that would be an amazing reunion, honestly.
I would definitely be excited. And I haven't gone back to Ohio because I don't have a reason to. But
Yeah.
if I did, I mean, I sadly I don't think, because none of my bullies are there. They've all left. But I would wonder if she's even around the area, and I guess I could ask around to try to really find her. But I had a yearbook too, but when we were moving to California from Ohio, it got lost in the move. I don't know what happened, or it's packaged up somewhere in storage. So I'm sure if I find that yearbook, I'll be able to find her last name and contact her. But
Yeah, that's a
it,
really good idea. Sometimes the
I
libraries will have copies of the yearbooks for that town too, so that might be an option.
oh, that's a
Maybe
good
somebody
idea.
who's an amazing researcher who listens to this episode will jump on your page and give you a shout out and do some research for you because forensic researchers can be pretty creative at tracking down stuff.
I would
Yeah.
definitely love that because she was definitely an amazing individual. It wasn't
That
the
took
first
a
time she had. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. I was just saying it took a lot of courage for her to do that.
Yeah, she definitely, and I don't believe it was the first time she's done it. I think she had done it. Uh, I don't remember if it was the first time. I know it was the first time that it had gotten so bad where I was sitting on the bus and I was like, wow, I really don't like my life right now. Like these are
Yeah.
not my friends. But it
No.
was definitely not her first time standing up for someone. So I really like that. It was, yeah, I mean, I just sat there quietly and I let her go off at them and I kind of just sat there. And then eventually my mom took me off the bus. So and I believe she was either 2 or a year. I know she was older than me. She was either a grade or two above me. So she was definitely older than me. So I never saw her again after that.
Oh, what a great story, though.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been a journey. It's been a mess but beautiful journey.
Well, yeah. I mean, you've had a lot happen to you. Really, when you go into a doctor's office, that is a sacred place. And it's the idea of going into a doctor's office automatically should create safety in people's minds. And for you to be assaulted in a doctor's office by somebody who's clearly, um, I don't have a nice word at all. I don't even have a word, who's clearly a deviant to society. That's horrendous. And then to kind of, bounce around from agency to agency trying to report this and just hit some brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. Most people would have given up in there, but you clearly have a fighter's spirit in you. And, you know, if you had to go through that process again, if you were back in that time frame, would you report? Was there anything about your journey as an adult survivor of sexual trauma that you would change at this point? If you were like, gosh, if I had to report again, I might do this differently or that differently.
There was one thing that which I don't know if I would change it. He had two kids. He had a, I think like a 4 year old daughter and a 2 year old son.
Mm.
And I hesitated a little bit reporting because I kept thinking like he has children. Like I don't want to do that to their family. Like I don't want to do that to two children grow up saying, "Oh, this is what happened with my dad." That kind of stuck with me a little bit and I felt awful and I worked with my therapist about it. I was like, "Oh, he has a 2 year old son and a 4 year old daughter." I was very, very hesitant on reporting because of that.
Mhm.
And I think now I don't know if I think I would take into consideration, but maybe not put it so heavily on myself that I'm supposed to protect his children as well, which I think I took
Right.
on that role. I was like, oh, I must protect his children and, they need their father. Like, because realistically, I mean, my parents have been separated and I grew up with my mom more than I've grown up with my dad. And I think
Yeah.
my mom did an amazing job.
Yeah.
And I know multiple people who grew up without their fathers and they're amazing people. But I guess it
Mhm.
was more so of what their dad would be named. And I just felt so
Mhm.
awful for these children that they have to grow up with their dad having have this label. And my therapist was like, you cannot put that on yourself. And it took me a minute to be like, yeah, I really can't. I don't know why I feel like I need to protect him in a sense,
Mhm.
but not necessarily him, more so his family dynamic. I kind
Yeah.
of was like, oh, let me protect the family dynamic, which is
Mhm.
was super weird, but at the time it made so much sense in my head. And now that I'm thinking back on it, as I've grown older, I don't know why I thought that was ideal. And it might be because I know I grew up in kind of a, I love my family. Totally
Mhm.
dysfunctional though.
Mhm.
Adore them. But like I guess maybe that's why I thought like I need to protect this family dynamic because I grew up with my dad traveling so much and he was never there, and how
Mhm.
much I missed him and how hard it was not having him home for birthdays years in and holidays, and I just didn't want to have to do this to these two kids either if it had gone criminally and he was prosecuted. And I
Right.
think now I wouldn't have put that much pressure on myself because of that.
Well, and you owning other people's emotions, owning other people's responsibility when they can't, right? Because obviously he was not thinking about that. He wasn't caring about that. But we, people like, and I'm going to lump you and I in here a little bit. People not like you and I who've been bullied, people like you and I who had childhood sexual trauma, people like you and I who have abandoned themselves, right? So people who abandon themselves are perfect victims for bullying, perfect victims for sexual assault. We put other people's emotional needs, other people's what they should be choosing, we put that ahead of ourselves so easily because we're conditioned to do that from whatever our early traumas were. And mine, I know what my early traumas were that made me abandon myself and put everybody else's thoughts, even abusive people's
Mhm.
needs, in front of mine. And it's only been recently through a lot of really hard work, really sometimes very terrifying work in therapy, that I've been able to flip that around. And it sounds like in therapy, you have been and have made amazing progress in that too, and honoring yourself. Because now for you to look at that situation and go, oh, why'd I do that? You know, there's so many reasons why you probably were thinking that was totally the logical thing. Because to me, I get it. I would have done the same thing. I would have completely been trying to own all of that myself too. I think that's completely normal for people who've survived so much trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely took that into consideration. I don't remember who said it. I don't think it was my therapist. It might have been a friend of mine, but they had kind of said, "Well, if he did it to you, how do you know he's not doing it to his kids?" And I guess that's kind of what
Mhm.
pushed me to report too, because I was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
if not saying that he did, because I have no idea if he did or not, and I would
Right.
really hope he wouldn't." But I that kind of also pushed me too, because I was like, "Oh, what if?" But that's also in itself another level of pressure to put on somebody like, oh well, now
Mhm.
you have to report because what if he's doing it to his kids, and you're like, oh my god, now I'm going through this and I have to worry about, like, it's so much to put on an individual, and I think it's
Yeah.
kind of like you got to process it one at a time because your mind's already in this whole fog, and you're like, I don't know what just, you're trying to comprehend what happened, and now you're trying to worry about like seven other people in the process of it.
Yeah. It's massive. It's too much.
It definitely, yeah, it definitely was, it was a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. Did you do talk therapy?
I did. So he had referred me to a therapist that was in this clinic, and it
Mhm.
was, I believe talk therapy is just face to face, correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
I did, and then when I was with her for about 3 years, but when the trial had happened, the medical board was having a lot of difficulty getting my records. Like the clinic wasn't giving me my records. They were refusing to give me my records. They were like, "Oh, she needs to sign for it," but I did like 10 times. So I kind of established that they were all site like kind of working for him. Like I was like, "Oh, they're trying to protect him," and I kind of threw my therapist in the bunch because he referred her to me. So
Mhm.
I don't think now that I'm older, I don't think that she was. I think she was just kind of going with whatever the clinic was doing. So,
Probably their policy and what their lawyer was allowing them to do, but it would very much feel like you're being abandoned.
yeah, and I kept having to go back to the office that it happened at, and I was like, I don't like this place. I don't like the way it smells.
It's
Um,
re-traumatizing. Yeah.
yeah, so I stopped seeing her, and I was with her for 3 years, so it was rough. It's like a really bad breakup. Um,
Yeah, that would have been
it was rough. And then I saw another therapist shortly after. It was my school's therapist, and I fell in love with her. Um,
good.
yeah, she was amazing. And then eventually, yeah, I stopped going to school, and I was like, oh, well, now I have to find a new one. And I recently found a new one. I've been with, I think, like 3 sessions with her, but so far I adore her. Um,
Great.
so it's been great. I'm very big on therapy. I love it.
Yeah, I am too. And especially where if you have trauma like you or I had when we were young in our formative years, trauma can really need to be bigger than one project. Like, I need to learn how to set boundaries. It can be a life rebuild and an
Hmm.
understanding of that early trauma. Uh, for me, it has been a life rebuild, and that doesn't come quick or easy. It's going to take some time. I'm really, really proud of you for sticking with therapy, but sticking with finding a therapist each time that you knew you needed one. And it can be really difficult to find a therapist that one you speak the same language, that has the skill set that you need in order to heal. And it can be really, I think, courageous and really, really hard to move on from a therapist when you know you need to move on. Like you called it, a really bad breakup.
Yeah, it was definitely.
I think I lost you. Let's see if the recording comes back around. Hi, Anna. Thanks for sticking with me through the break. Welcome back. Right before the break, we were talking about how important it is that you have a great therapist, but also how difficult it is when you have to leave that therapist. And you were talking about you had to leave that therapist. It's not a good space for you to be anymore.
Yeah, I was seeing my therapist for 3 years. So she knew everything. Even things that I there were certain things that I was like, oh, I'm not gonna tell a therapist that, because it was mine, and it was my story, and I was like, I don't feel comfortable sharing it. But
Yeah.
she got it out of me. She was like, let's talk it all out, and we did. But when I had retained a lawyer for the assault, on my end, so the criminal charges was through the California Medical Board. I was not part of that. They only used my case to further what they were going to do. So I
Gotcha.
was technically not. So if you look up the file, it's anonymous. My name is not on there. They use my initials. So I'm not technically part of whatever happens there. So I civilly was like, let me see if I can maybe at least, my thought
Get some
process was
closure.
get his license revoked so he doesn't see any other female patients.
Yeah.
And when I had retained a lawyer, I didn't know that they were going to file charges against the clinic as well. And because the clinic was, my doctor, my therapist, it was everybody in one, I just felt like our relationship was kind of tainted.
Yeah.
I also thought that because the clinic was not so much as defending him, but because I had such difficulty getting my medical records, that I was like, oh, maybe my therapist is protecting him. Now I don't think that. I think she was just following the clinic protocol. Um, because she would, I mean, I voiced my concern with her too. I was like, hey, like, I'm worried he's doing stuff with my files. And she was like, no, we can all see your files. Like, he's not touching your files. But then when the California Medical Board came back, I got a packet of everything that they concluded in the investigation, and he was messing with my files. So
Wow.
I don't know if maybe she didn't know, because he would
Yeah.
just say I didn't see him. So there were times where I went to go see him, and he said I was never there. So I don't know if she just didn't know were you really like, I don't know if she just thought I don't know if you were actually here or not, but it kind of scared me, and I was very, very cautious of who I was now allowing to see me because of what happened. So I was like, oh, you must be defending him if you had said that. So I kind of cut her out cold turkey. I don't recommend doing that unless it's obviously really bad, but I don't recommend if you're with like a regimen and you're seeing a therapist and working with them, cutting them out cold turkey. It was like having withdrawals. I
Yeah.
was so sad. Like I lost this person that I would see once a week.
Yeah.
I would talk to her all the time, and now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, she. And I will admit that I think I was also just scared, and I was like, oh, that whole clinic must be protecting him. Um, I don't think that way anymore. I don't think at least she was. I
Hmm.
think she just was unaware of the full circumstances, and she was unaware of what was really happening between him and my files and the investigation and him.
Yeah.
So I do think differently. I was cautious the next time I picked a therapist.
Hmm.
I have one now who is she looks like she's about my age. She's definitely younger, but she's
Hmm.
super pro. It's so nice. She's so pro Anna. Like she's so,
That's so
you know,
great.
yeah. And I'm not used to it because she doesn't talk to me like a therapist. She talks to me like she's one of my friends. And
Hmm.
I at first I was like, I don't like this. Like I don't like my first two sessions with her. I was like, I don't know if I'm a fan of this. Like you're talking to me like I
Yeah.
talk to a friend. But then the more
Yeah.
we went on, she would call me out on certain things that she was like, hey, like you can't think like that. And I was like, oh no, okay. She's she's
Yeah.
calling me out on the negativity and the fear that I've instilled in myself. So I like that.
That's how my therapist really approaches our sessions. It is from this like cheering squad, accountability, tough love space, underscored with incredible training and knowledge and practical knowledge of her craft. And but it's very comfortable. It is very comfortable, and it really is like I've got somebody in my corner working with me all the time, and it has been amazing, absolutely amazing.
It's definitely one of my favorite parts of the week is just getting to talk to
Yeah.
her for like an hour. And with nowadays with everything via internet, it's just I don't have to go anywhere. I can sit in the comfort of my own home. And I think
Mhm.
that was also an issue with my last therapist is I which I never felt like I was like this. I developed this social anxiety. Like I didn't want to be around people.
Mhm.
I didn't want to I'm always tired. So it's so easy for me to fall asleep.
Mhm.
And I, you know, I do it often. I'll go to like a family's get together and I'll fall asleep on the couch. I'm always tired, and it
Mhm.
became a fear now because I was like, well, I don't want to. What if I fall asleep and this happens? And what if I fall
Mhm.
asleep and this happens? And it started like straining. Not I don't want to say straining, but it started. I started developing like really bad OCD from it where I
Mhm.
had to get reassurance constantly from random people. Like I was just like, hey, can you guys reassure me that nothing happened? Can you reassure me that, nobody touched me? Can you reassure me that this happened? And
Mhm.
there's only so many times people can hear that before they're like, what is going on? Like, why do you keep asking us if somebody touched you, if somebody did this? So then you have to, for me, I felt I had to let them know what had happened. And everyone was super supportive about it. Nobody was like, that's not normal. Nobody
Yeah.
thought it wasn't normal. They were like, oh, we get it. But
Yeah.
I also feel like because I kept doing that, I started seeking reassurance for everything. And
Yeah.
now, like, I seek it for, it's one of my worst habits. I seek reassurance for everything. And I don't know if it's necessarily because of what happened or just the fact that I don't want to disappoint anyone or maybe a combination of both. But I constantly seek this type of reassurance that, like, nothing happened or, hey, you know, did I make the right choice in doing this? It starts leading kind of away from the assault and into your everyday life. And
Mhm.
now I seek it for the minor decisions, and
Yeah.
it's rough.
It is rough. No, I can totally associate with what you're saying, and I've I had that in leaving abuse. I literally made no decision by myself and sought approval. Literally, like one of my friends had, I, for it's terrible to say, but she had too much control over every decision I made because I couldn't make a single decision myself. And it was really just a terrifying part of me that I gave away, but through more therapy around trusting myself, and when like those appropriate times, like yes, for that you do need a second opinion, it's okay, but honestly, for that, do you really need a second opinion, or are you just feeling insecure, like associating or disassociating from my past trauma from my current life became some of the work that I did. And it was really intentional work that my therapist led me through. But I totally resonate with what you're saying. That is just it's just part of that healing process, and it is something that you can get through. I know that you can. You're a strong, courageous woman, and it won't be like that forever. um,
Thank you.
you're
And
welcome.
speaking to you is like, and it's another reason why I started the Renee campaign, because shared, like, it's so many shared experiences and so many shared, even though, we've never met in person, but it's so nice to sit there
Yeah,
and connect with someone where I'm like, oh, I don't really know if this was normal behavior that I did this, or if you're talking to somebody who hasn't really gone through it and you're like, oh, well, this is what I'm doing. And they're like, I don't get why you're doing that. But then you
yeah,
talk to other survivors and they're like, oh, I do that all the time.
yeah.
It's so reassuring. I mean, it's so awful because there's so many of us, but it's also so reassuring because you're like, oh, I'm not alone. Like, there's a whole community that has my back, that's been there through it.
Hmm. That's so true. How tell me about some of the support that you have gotten from your community. I love the resources that you have created. I love your posts. They are positive, upbeat, but they are also really, really deep. And they get a lot of conversations going.
So when I first launched it, it was mostly my friends that were following me.
Hmm.
And a lot of them, it was new. I hadn't told them anything that had happened. And I spoke to, it was my sister-in-law, and she was like, you gotta get like-minded people. And she's like, find pages that are kind of the same message, the same concept, the same everything. And she's like, start following them, start communicating with them. And I was like, really, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, go for it. And it's the best advice I've ever gotten,
That's
because
awesome.
so many people would message me, or if I made a post, if I make a post about mental health, or sexual assault or bullying, the comments are filled with other individuals that are like, hey, I mean, a lot of them are anonymous stories, but it's
Yeah.
it's filled with comments that are like, hey, we've been there, we get it, like, you're gonna make it through this.
Yeah.
Or I receive messages of other girls who are like, hey, we're going through this too, like, you're not alone. It's so amazing, it's so refreshing to know that you're not alone in the process. And this community has been a huge blessing. And I'm so happy I took that advice, because I never thought I would do so. I was like, oh, it'll just be my friends. And, I don't know if I'm ready to share it with the world, but I see how raw and authentic everyone else's stories are. And, I
Hmm.
really do stand in a place of gratitude, because I get to read people's stories and people's posts, and you're a huge example of that, reading your blogs. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, to be able to share that with everyone, it's so, I want to share what I've been through too. It's so courageous and it's so inspiring to be like, I want to share what I've gone through too, so I can help others. Because each story, whether I've actually been through what they're talking about or not, it's so inspiring just to be able to be like, I want to be that support, because I feel like you're supporting me, even though we may not have
Yeah.
gone through anything similar. And it's
Yeah.
exactly what had happened.
Yeah. No, I completely resonate with that. One of the things that, and thank you for the kind words.
Of course.
One of the things that was so vital to me is as soon as I'm an outward healer, so I cannot heal in private. I have to heal by sharing and pulling people with me. And the 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 thing that is unique about that is when you run into other people who really get more on their healing journey, um, by outward healing, by sharing their story, by pulling other people along and getting them to share their story when they're comfortable and when they're ready. it is a whole community within itself as well of these kind of external healers. Like, right, we heal externally because you and I are both still projecting here a little bit for you, but I believe that you and I are both still in active healing,
Hmm.
and we are pretty much like putting it all out there, actively doing this in public so that other people don't have to suffer through, hopefully learn and don't suffer through the same things that we did.
Exactly. And I think another thing is you're introduced to so many other individuals within the environment and the communities. So, for
Mhm.
example, when I had first launched the Renee campaign, a friend of mine, not even a friend, I worked with her,
Mhm.
older woman has a 13-year-old daughter. She called me and I was like, that's strange. I haven't talked to this woman in like 2 years. And I picked
Yeah.
up, I was like, hey, like, what's going on? And she was like, your campaign, you deal with bullying and stuff. And I was like, oh, I mean, I was like, I share stories. And she's like, look, I have to tell you about my daughter. She's 13. This is what she's going through. And I was
Oh,
like, oh, wow. I was like, I didn't even know you were, I was like, I know somebody you could talk to. She's a counselor. Like, she deals with, so it also introduced me to
yeah.
a community where I can share other people's pages and be like, hey,
Resources.
exactly. Like, hey, here's this individual. They know what you're going through because they work with that.
Yeah. Well, there's
So
so much power in removing the shame and stigma around that and being a resource for somebody who trusts you, and they're going to take what you say and jump.
and yeah, and it's not that people necessarily have to share what they've gone through because a lot of the stories that I've shared, some of them are personal. I know I've shared personal stories. The blogs within the Renee campaign are going to be personal. But
Mhm.
I never want anyone to feel like, because I know my friends are like, oh, we can share our stories if we want, but these are friends who have never told anybody what's happened to them. And I never want anyone to ever feel like they're pressured to share either. It's more of a safe space of, and that's what the community is. It's a safe space of, if we want to remain anonymous, you can remain anonymous, or you don't even have to share. You could just ask questions, or just say, hey, I'm going to ask you privately, and please keep it private. It's such a respectful community as well, because I know for some of my friends, they've never shared with anybody, and the last thing I want is for them to feel like, oh, well, we want to support you, so we'll share.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing I want. I don't want someone to feel the pressure of sharing, because I know how difficult it was. It took me years before I was like, okay, let me finally share
Yeah.
everything that happened to me.
No, I think that's really important to underscore that people should only be where they feel like they can be. And nobody, don't compare your healing with anybody else's healing. Healing is such a private and personal process, and it is different for every single person. It takes, shorter time for some people, longer time for some people. It really has to be dialed back to whatever the person feels like. And certainly, neither of us would ever encourage, because I have people who share their stories too. We would never encourage somebody, or if, and flip it, if somebody is encouraging you to share when you're not ready, that's not somebody who's safe for you. You really want to stick with
Exactly.
people who can take and hold your confidence, hold your darkest hour in their confidence for you, with you, and never ever be pressured to go to a space, because that can unravel if you're not ready to do that healing. And you may not need to do that healing, right? You may be at a comfortable spot with a great life that you enjoy, and that's perfectly okay. But never allow somebody to pressure you or bully you into healing.
I completely agree. Can you hear me? I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. I can hear you. And just for our listeners,
Okay, perfect.
we have experienced some technical difficulties. Anna is located in Hawaii, and there's a storm happening there. I am located in Southern Oregon, and there's a thunderstorm happening here. So we have experienced some technical difficulties. We both live kind of in the mountain ranges, so our connection is a little bit what it is. But I think that's one of the beautiful things of technology. While sometimes we curse it, it also allows us to connect and to meet, and it brings people together with similar stories to support and to create healthy platforms for many.
Definitely, yeah. And I asked because my headphone made a weird noise, and I was like, "Oh no!" So I thought I thought it dropped, but very happy I did not lose you. I'm very
I
happy.
heard that too, and I jotted down the time just in case.
Oh, okay, good. Because my headphone made a noise, and I was like, "Oh no, I lost her." Okay, I'm happy I didn't lose you though.
That's
But
so
yeah,
awesome.
I completely agree with everything you said. I think, especially now with the wake of everything, also, with you have celebrities that are speaking out against
Yeah,
bullying, sexual assault within their work environment, and things that I think was normalized by society that now we're kind of like, oh, this isn't normal or funny. Um,
yeah,
simple jokes, not even just basing it off of bullying, simple jokes that, you know, people may have said in the past that now we're like, oh, that's not really okay to say to other people because we don't know how people are affected by our words, and our words are super powerful. If our words can heal, we talk to therapists, their words heal. If our words can heal, they can also harm.
yeah,
And I think that we've normalized a lot of behavior. I think also we've normalized, when I say we, I mean society,
yes,
has normalized specific behaviors within sexual assault as well.
yeah,
Um, Whereas people would, I don't know if normally in the past they would think like, oh, your husband can't sexually assault you, or your boyfriend. They totally can.
yeah, they can.
Yeah, they totally can. And it's
Yeah,
something that I think as society we're like, oh, like it's your boyfriend, or oh, well, I was going to, and I know I've heard I've heard it said, within, you know acquaintances who are male, where they've been drinking and they were like, well, I probably would have slept with her anyway, and it's like, that, no, like, that's
mhm,
not okay. you know
yeah,
we've
yeah,
kind of put the stigma that men can't be sexually assaulted either, and it's like, just because you would have sober doesn't mean that it was okay that it happened while you weren't able to consent. And I think that we as
yeah,
a society have normalized certain behaviors that now are kind of coming to light, where we're like, this isn't normal, this isn't okay.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I think the more pages like yours that come together and speak out and provide places for safe places for people to connect and talk about this, the less normalization of those bad behaviors we're going to have, and the more normalization of people stopping it and setting healthy boundaries that protect themselves and knowing what to do if the worst does happen. Having some resources when that does, because you feel completely lost and alone.
Oh, completely, yeah. I completely agree. And I think this community has done a great job with the resources. I have, um male survivors which I see them and I'm like, I'm so proud that there are
Yeah,
male survivors that are speaking out against things that have happened to them.
yeah.
And it's so heartbreaking, of course, but it's so, like, imagine a little boy sitting there thinking like, oh, this is what happened. Well, I'm
Mhm.
not going to say anything because it's embarrassing. And it's like, there's nothing embarrassing about, well, the only thing that's embarrassing is someone thought that this was okay to do.
Yeah, and cover up,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
Um, I also have male survivors of narcissistic abuse, narcissistic women on my page that I have great conversations with, and I just encourage them so deeply. Just it's a sexless crimes. These things that happen, they are sexless, but
Hmm.
society trains everybody that this can only happen to women. And the more work that you and I and our communities that are banding together do to normalize people to speak up, normalize people to be in therapy, normalize people to make healthy choices for themselves. The, you know, I think that the less instances over time, and I'm talking this, a long period of time, hopefully we can start to turn that tide backward.
I completely agree. And I remember this goes back to, I believe his name was Corey Feldman, the childhood actor who exposed
Mhm.
like the pedophilia ring when he was a young actor.
Yeah.
I might be saying his name wrong, but I remember when it first came out, people were like, "Oh, it like." Um, I don't know if they necessarily didn't take it seriously, but I remember it was very, it wasn't talked about as much as it should. He was stating,
Yeah.
"Hey, this is what happened to me as a child. This is the Hollywood ring of what had happened," and people were kind of like, "Oh, we're gonna brush it off."
Yeah.
And the Me Too movement happened, and then a bunch of women came out, and I forgot his name again. Terry Crews, I think it was, came out, and then it became more talked about. But I always felt
Mhm.
bad because I felt like Corey Feldman, it wasn't discussed as much, that there's a huge
Yeah.
issue with how it starts at this young age, and these
Yeah.
kids grow up with the inappropriate care that they need or the help that they need. And
Yeah.
I another example would be, I don't know if you've heard the I was at 19 Kids and Counting, the Duggar family.
I've heard of that family, but I have not heard. I don't watch a lot of news because just in breaking the cycle of abuse, that's like all I can handle. So I don't let a lot of the world news into my world. So what's happening there?
I should really start doing that. I think it's also just because of the pages I follow. It pops up on my,
Your
it
feed?
kind of keeps me current, yeah, within my profile. It keeps me current, so it pops up. He had so the Duggars are like 19 kids. The
Yeah, I remember their TV show or something.
Yeah, and there's the oldest son. So it came out that he had sexually abused
Ooh,
his older sisters and a friend of theirs, I believe. I
wow.
might, or it
That's
might have been,
horrible.
yeah, I know there was sexual abuse. I just don't remember. I believe it was two of his sisters, his oldest sisters, and a friend.
Yeah. Well, it's
And
okay. People can just Google it if they want the full story. Like,
yeah, and
it's okay.
it was, I remember reading that, and he was, I mean, when the oldest son did it, I believe he's still older than them, but he was young as well. And the
Yeah.
family, I believe, the issue was that they had tried to cover it up. They were like, "Oh, he we're working with our priest and this and that," but it's like those girls, those little girls need the appropriate help and the care,
Yeah.
just to, not so they feel like anything's wrong, but more so to feel like their voice is heard. Because in a situation
Yeah.
like that where there is abuse or sexual abuse, I feel like your voice is never heard.
Yeah.
Um, and especially when you're that young, because I know when I was
Yeah.
7, I mean, I was crying. I remember going to the police station. Um, I had to point out the individual who had done it, and
Mhm.
remember, I was 7
You're
or 8. I
you're
was little.
tiny. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a baby, and I was crying. I was
Yeah.
crying, and I remember it was one of the detectives was kind of getting upset, and I was like, okay, well, I'm a child, so I don't want to speak to someone that's getting
Yeah.
upset with me. And I
No.
remember my mom took me home, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, not. I wasn't a fan of that. Like, I wasn't. I don't know what's going on, and I don't blame my parents, but I think sticking me into therapy or something would have been super beneficial for me. And
Yeah.
at that moment, they didn't. Once again, I don't blame them at all. I think they were just trying to do whatever they thought was right in the moment, and I wasn't put into therapy. But I always wondered if maybe when it happened with my doctor, I started
Mhm.
reliving everything that had happened as a child.
Right.
So like I'll bring, like, it's like a whole new trauma now, because I was like, oh, my doctor, oh my god,
Yeah.
like I don't like white vans and all those
Yeah.
jokes about kids getting lured in. I mean, yeah, I was lured into a van. Kids are, we think like, oh, kids are, you hear it all the time when they're like, oh, kids are smart. They're not. No, I mean, they're kids at the end of the
They're
day. They're
kids.
kids.
Yeah. They have limited experiences to draw upon, and we're told and taught to obey adults. And
Exactly.
we're told and taught to abandon our emotions. Oh, shh, 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 be quiet, don't cry. They don't,
Yeah.
kids only have a certain limited resources of communicating with adults. And when adults constantly are shushing and abandoning, asking the child to abandon them, there's appropriate times where you're like, holy heck, you don't need the sucker, right? But if your child is really crying out for help and you're abandoning them, they're going to learn that that's the normal. And
Exactly.
they're going to abandon themselves in the most, um, you know, to them normal way. To you, if as a parent, if you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, how did that happen? Uh, it's so plain if you look at it through the eyes of a healed person, like from through therapy. But like when I look back at active abuse in this family, my oldest son, who's graduating tomorrow, 2 years ago was having suicidal thoughts and had been having them off and on for a number of years. For the beginning part of those suicidal thoughts, I, as the mom, could not put my hands around what was causing them because I had so normalized the abuse in this family. And, when I clawed us out of it and began owning it and began having therapy, I had this wake up call on Mother's Day and I literally owned my role in that abuse because I constantly asked my children to abandon their feelings, um, and normalize abuse. I did that. And now it's my job to undo it. And that is my mission in life right now. And they are healing and we don't have any of those thoughts. And he speaks about that to his peers. Actually, he has actually had conversations about with other peers who had suicidal thoughts as well. So he's turned that around, but it's been a lot of hard work and a lot of all of us growing and changing and owning our who we were. Yeah, we can't
Yeah.
hide from who we were, and if we want to become whoever it is that we're thinking we're going to become.
Oh, that's so important. That's Thank you for sharing that. That like gave me I have goosebumps.
Yeah.
That's so important because you're absolutely right. It's the normal and once again, not to say that anyone is at fault but the abuser
Mm-mm.
themselves, but it yeah, it does become a normalized behavior. It's certain things that we normalize, and I I think if it I think at a, I don't know how I knew, but at a young age, I must have known it wasn't normal because I had, like I said, I had told my dad. Um, I was like, hey, um, this is what happened to me, and then my mom started
Mhm.
crying. So it's like, oh, it's definitely not normal. Like it's not.
Yeah.
It's, but you have that hint. You have that whole, but it's also like I never, and I always told my mom because we've talked about it. She knows about my campaign. She's super supportive of it, and
That's
we've talked
good.
about it. And I've told her like I never want my child to feel the fear that, oh, well, this is what happened, but I don't want to tell you that I just went into this man's van, because you have that fear that like, oh man, I'm gonna get in trouble if I tell my mom I was just, like it's like
Mhm.
I'd rather hide what just happened than be like, oh, well, I was lured into a van because of a Barbie doll. And it's something like, oh man, she's gonna be so mad at me, so I don't want to tell her. And I told my mom, I was like, not that I was scared, because I wasn't scared, but when the cop was like talking to me, I was like, oh, my parents are gonna be so mad at me. Like I wanted a Barbie doll, and I just walked into this guy's van,
Yeah.
and it's something so simple. It's like I obviously my parents didn't, they weren't thinking about, oh, you got. They were thinking about what actually happened. They weren't thinking about why it happened. They were upset about it happening. So it's something that like you instill this fear also that if we don't, hmm, trying to word it properly, if we trying to word it in a way where, because it makes, as I'm thinking about it, the way I want to say it makes sense, but when I'm trying to speak it, it's not making sense.
I totally understand. I do that sometimes too.
Like instilling this, I just don't want my if I ever have kids down the line, I don't ever want them to be like the fear of telling my parents something that I did that should have been known to be wrong. I'm
Mhm.
gonna hide that because of the fear that
Of the
I
punishment, the shame.
yeah, of what happened. So it goes back to examples of um an example when we've society has shamed women, like, oh well, why were you drunk? And it's like, what
Mhm.
since when was that the issue, that women are drinking or the specific clothing somebody was wearing. And it's kind of the same
Right.
concept with children, is where we're saying like, well, why would you get lured into a van? Don't you know better than to? It's like, well, these kids won't speak up if that's what we've scared into them, that,
Right.
oh well, this is why I went to the van, this is what happened, because then they're not going to
Right.
say it at all, because they have this
Right.
fear that, well, I'm going to get in trouble, so I'm just not going to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely understand. There's been so many things that I haven't spoke up about over the course of my life because I knew what the punishment would be.
Hmm.
And actually that mentality right there kept me in active abuse for 3 decades. So, it's something that, early childhood is imperative in creating a space where your child can tell you anything without fear. And
Exactly.
that's that's obviously clearly part of the work that you and I are both doing, and we are very passionate about that work. You are doing a fabulous job and so incredibly courageous. Is there anything that you want to be sure to tell listeners? Because this podcast will come out at about the same time that your website goes live. And, is there anything that you want to be sure that listeners take away from this show today?
Definitely. I just kind of want to more so focus on just the support. Like, you, once again, as sad as it is, you're not alone in what you go through. Sadly, there are way too many of us that go through this, but there's a whole community, and I'm going to be 30 this year, and I just discovered that community. So it's not
Yeah.
to say that you're behind, or even no matter how old you are, it's okay to discover this community later and decide, I want to heal now and today. And healing is not, there's no linear way to do it. So it's okay at
Yeah.
whatever age you decide, I want to heal. There's a whole community there that's standing behind your back. We're all there for you. There is not one person on my page that I don't think I would message and say, I really need to talk to somebody, and one of them wouldn't respond. Like, I would
Yeah.
assume I'd get like 100 messages. So
Yeah.
it's such a supportive community, and you're definitely never alone in what you go through. There's so much worth fighting for, and there's so much more to you than what happened, and there's such a journey behind everything. And I know it's so cliche to say, and it's not a quote I enjoy because I
It's
think
okay.
there's negative senses to it. But people always say, there's that quote where people say, which has been an issue within my friend group, where they say everything happens for a reason. There is no reason to justify sexual assault. There is no
Right.
reason to justify abuse. There's no reason to justify any of that. So
Yeah.
don't live your life trying to find a Google quote that's describing what you go through, because I can't tell you how
Yeah.
many times I've told people who haven't been sexually assaulted, where they're like, "Oh, it's okay. Everything happens for a reason." I think maybe a speeding
Yeah.
ticket might happen for a reason, but I don't think being sexually assaulted or abused happens for a reason.
No.
I think we try so hard to kind of figure out how we feel, or at least I know I did this. I was like, oh, let me Google what happened to me, and I get all these like Google quotes where they're like, everything happens for a reason, you're a better person because of it. And it's like, I think I could have done without everything that happened to me, and I think I could have been an okay person. um if you live by that quote, more power to you, but don't try to find what you're going through by quotes that were said by people back whenever. It's
Yeah.
okay to come up with your own, hey, this is what happened and this is what I'm taking out of it. And it's okay if it's something such as anger or sadness, or even if you're forgiving, whatever it is. I really want to stress the whole Google quotes is not something to live by entirely. I don't know if that makes sense. Only because
Oh, it
I've
makes
done that.
perfect
Okay.
sense.
Only
I
because
think
I've done that. So
oh my gosh, me too. I think I've spent almost 3 or 4 years secretly looking at Google quotes and different websites and different accounts, and all it did was increase the rage because here I am secretly researching, what am I crazy? Is this behavior normal? Anytime you have to research, is this behavior normal? Just go ahead and jump to the end. No, it's not.
yeah, no, I agree. I think putting uplifting quotes is amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
I love all the uplifting quotes because I see so many. But I think that whole saying like, oh, like those, especially those ones that like describe depression, like, oh, this is what depression is. It's like depression is different for everybody, and when you don't feel like you fit
Yeah.
in this specific category, it confuses, especially younger individuals are like, well, I don't, then I'm not depressed, then they go on thinking that something's wrong with them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's one of those, it can keep you in it's a kind of double-edged sword. It can keep you in the loop of where you're at. Um, then on the flip side of it, it can be that actioning like, "Oh, wow, maybe I need help." It can affirm that, at the end of the day, I think that everybody needs a therapist.
Yes.
Everybody needs a community where they can share their pain and their hurt without any fear or any shame. And everybody needs, some coaching to get through all of that. Just really surrounding and supporting yourself with people who are like minded because you already have enough people in your life who aren't going to get it, who are still going to be a part of your journey, right? You're still going to have family members
Yes.
who don't get it, family members who, or friends that you're still going to have as friends, coworkers that you're still going to have as coworkers. It's important to surround yourself with a community that does get it. And that is great, great advice. And Anna, what is the name of your website that's getting published?
It is www.reneecampaign.org.
Perfect. And you have an amazing resource that you have created. I can't wait to let's do this again in 6 months or
Yes.
a year down the road and see where your journey is taking you because this is a really powerful journey that you have started.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity. It's been amazing to hear your story as well.
Well, you're welcome. Just thank you for coming on. I think it's incredibly brave when people are willing to share. And there is nothing about you that doesn't leave me with, wow, this woman is rocking it. She is fantastically courageous. And I am so glad to have met you. And I look forward to getting to know you better and working together more.
Likewise, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have an amazing night. Thank
You
you for
too.
being a guest.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.